Good morning, everyone. Excellent. So we get a special treat today. I think we mentioned at our last town hall that we would be having a special guest today, and I'm just so thrilled for them to be here. As you know, right now, we're having such a wonderful, wonderful mission going on with Orion. Orion is in its distant retrograde orbit. If you have not had a chance to do the live views to see the imagery that's coming back from Orion, please take the opportunity to do so. What a wonderful mission. So what we're going to do today is we're going to hear from our NASA headquarter leadership, and they're going to be talking to us about Moon to Mars. And this is a road show. They have gone to 3 other centers so far. They've gone to Marshall Space Flight Center, Kennedy Space Flight Center, and now they're here at Johnson to share with you. In today's town hall, you're going to hear from Pam Melroy, our Deputy Administrator, Bob Cabana, our Associate Administrator, Kurt Spuds Vogel, Director of Space Architecture, and from Kathy Kerner, Deputy Associate Administrator for Exploration Systems Development. I'm very happy that they're going to be here. We're going to have a full day with them. They'll have an opportunity to also go over to Mission Control and see some of the things that are going on over there. We're going to have a discussion later in the afternoon talking about strengthening our programs and acquisition processes, and then they'll also have some tours as a part of their visit. But we want to give them a warm welcome and thank them for coming to the Johnson Space Center.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. Let's see if I can, okay, she already gave us an introduction, so now you know who we all are. I'd like to start out by saying how fantastic it is to be home at the Johnson Space Center. I always feel that way when I drive through the gates here. It just makes me happy. I spent 14 of the most amazing and exciting years of my life here in the astronaut office, and it always does feel like coming home. On behalf of the administrator also, he charged me especially to say thank you to all of you for all the work that has gone in for more than a decade to prepare for the Artemis I launch. And I just have to say congratulations on a successful launch. We still have to bring our baby home, but Orion is performing so well out there and the whole world is watching. So from the bottom of our hearts, thank you and congratulations. So I'll start out by talking about strategy for just a moment. So I know that you're all familiar that the principal role of NASA headquarters is to get more money for what we actually do in the field, but there is another job we have too, and it's to look at cross-agency strategy, and particularly to think about all of our stakeholders, as we know, who are very influential, those in the White House, those on the Hill, those in industry, and how to create cross-agency strategies. This is a perfect time for us to be thinking about it. And coming in, Bill and I recognized with the imminent launch of the Artemis I mission, it was really time to start thinking about, after a decade of investment in that hardware, wither the future, right? We've got hardware for Artemis 2, 3, 4, and even 5 in work. And those are all very critical test flights to build important capabilities. But still, the question comes up outside the agency and even inside the agency all the time, and what are we doing with this? What are we doing here? And I think it's very, very important that we articulate that, and we have a shared vision for that. And that's what strategy is all about. Now, this is kind of the holy grail. I can tell you I talked to every single living previous administrator of NASA before taking on the role of deputy, and asked them their thoughts. And they all said this is the holy grail, is a politically resilient human spaceflight program that has the backing and the support of all of our stakeholders, that everyone understands and has a shared vision, and it will carry through multiple administrations. Pretty daunting task, but with Bob's help, Bill and I decided we were going to roll up our sleeves and take our turn at it. And that's what I'm here to really kind of set the stage for, and you'll see the team that is going to tell you more about how we're going to execute on that strategy. So I go back typically to first principles when I'm thinking about strategy, and I think this is probably the most important chart for me that I brief. I use it in every single briefing I give. And you guys have probably been in this situation where someone asks you, why do we even have a NASA? Why do we go to space? We've got all these problems here on Earth. So this is what I call the why chart. And I can tell you over decades of being in the space industry, this sort of consolidates all the reasons and the benefits to the American people, but also to humanity, that going to space brings us. So I'll start out with science, because it's very important. Of course, here at JSC, you know that microgravity is a hugely unique environment to study the human body and to study multiple physical processes and how they operate in microgravity that gives us insights and benefits us here on Earth. But we can also see from things like the James Webb Space Telescope that being outside the Earth's atmosphere provides us a very unique place to understand the cosmos. And of course, if you're trying to understand climate and our own Earth, just really understanding that, there's not enough UAVs in the world to spread around to study our climate. You've really got, if you're going to do it at global scale, you have to do it from space. And so going to space provides us a very, very unique aspect that we cannot get anywhere else, to understand the universe from the minute biological processes of our own bodies and our own biology through the Earth, the solar system, and in fact the whole cosmos. And that's very, very important. It's one of the most foundational pillars of why we go to space and the benefits it brings. The next one is something that I kind of bucket into something I call national posture. So that encompasses many things. The foundational science and technology capability of a country. So we all know the spin-offs of what we do. And if you go back to Apollo, for example, really in so many ways, Apollo jump-started the computer industry and software industry in the world. There are so many examples like that when you're doing something really, really hard, in order to achieve it, you create foundational capability that actually spills over into solving other problems for the country. It's a foundational capability. And I can tell you around the world, governments understand that. And this is one of the most important reasons they invest in space, is because they know they're going to get all those additional benefits. Interestingly, we also have been seeing from our investments at NASA, we are also having an enormous economic impact on the country. You may have seen the most recent economic impact report from that was just released, talking about our 2021 budget and investments. And it was a 3-for-1 return. So for our budget, approximately $25 billion, we have $75 billion of economic impact in the United States. That's incredibly important. But I would also say that we have also in the last decade jump-started a commercial industry that is the envy of the world. What we did with commercial cargo and with commercial crew took a commercial industry that was doing 0 launches a year in 2011 to now well over 50 and just growing. Those investments in low-cost access to space, but also to bring capabilities to the space station, whether it's a CubeSat launching from the space station, like Planet got their start doing that, but also the research and technologies that are being proven out as ride shares and also on ISS. And that's another thing that other countries around the world look at. This is a high growth industry. I mean, I'm talking, if you talk to people around the world, if nothing else, they're like, well, we got to get on that bandwagon. If it's a high growth industry, we need to be there. So there's really a foundational capability in national posture that we're bringing. And then, of course, some of the amazing things that we do with our international partnerships that also enhance our national leadership and our national posture. And finally, inspiration. For you guys, I don't need to explain that at all. We have that inspiration when we come to work every single day. But it has a very, very practical impact as well. I was a part of the Apollo generation. I watched the Apollo 11 moon landing and decided that I wanted to be an astronaut. And a whole generation of scientists, engineers, aviators, and explorers were growing up from the inspiration of Apollo to become a whole surge of STEM professionals. And we know that's going to happen with the Artemis generation as well. What's interesting about these three pillars is that you can talk to people, in a lot of cases when you talk to someone, only one of these pillars resonates with them. They don't care about the other stuff. There's only one thing they care about. I think it's important to understand, though, if you're building a strategy that you want to be politically resilient, you better be firing on all three cylinders, because if you're not, you are not going to have unity, and you're not going to be able to have the political will behind what you're doing. And that's very important. So this was foundational at the very beginning of the strategy to say why. What is the value that we provide? And we better be providing value in all three of these areas if we're going to be politically resilient. So with that, you also have to start thinking about risk. So you can pull together a strategy, an architecture, you can decide what you're going to do, and we all know how to do that. NASA invented systems engineering, right? And we've been working on this for decades. We know a lot about what we're trying to do, both at the moon, but also to get onto Mars. But we have had some huge challenges and things that we have to think about going forward. So across the top, three ugly red blobs. Those are what I call the external forces. Insufficient funding, external pressure to change what we're doing, change our architecture, change our goals without any rigor whatsoever. Just let's do this differently instead. Unfortunately, what happens is when you have those kinds of negative influences, it leads to what I'll call unhelpful cultural behaviors internally. And that's the four ugly red blobs at the bottom. So people start to get scared. They build stovepipes. They want to protect the thing that they're working on. They think it's the most important part of the architecture, and they're going to defend it because they're worried that it's going to get taken away. And that leads to poor communication as well. So we really have to be thinking about all these things as we go forward. And these things all look very familiar to you because you're just as familiar with the historical context as I am. We have been on a roller coaster for 30 years since the vision for space exploration. And yes, I was here. I was actually working in industry when Constellation was canceled. And it was incredibly hard. It was very hard for all of us. We haven't forgotten it. It's kind of the thing that people are like, oh, are you going to go there? I'm like, yeah, I'm going to go there. It scared us all. And I think there's still a lot of anxiety about, and there's actually, believe it or not, a lot of myths out there about why Constellation got canceled. And pieces may be true, but a lot of it is just stories that we're telling each other that scare us to take steps going forward, especially to talk about a strategy. Because if we start talking about Mars, maybe we'll get cut again. And that is something that we cannot do. Over the last decade, the strategy was what was called a capabilities-based approach. And the idea behind that is we're building a rocket, we're building a spacecraft, and then wherever they send us, we'll be able to just go there. And that was the strategy. I can't fault it. I certainly can't criticize previous leadership for that approach. I really understand why that approach was taken, but we are in a very different place right now. There is nothing that gets support like the launch of the flight hardware and the beginning of a flight program. And so for us, this is a critical time for us to say, is this really the approach that we want to take? I gotta tell you, a lot of focus on the transportation system, and that's great. But we've been through this rodeo before with Apollo. We can't just focus on the transportation system and say, look at us, we're going to the moon. We really have to have a broader strategy. So one of the challenges, of course, with receiving limited funding is you can have an architecture, but you know you're not going to get all the money for it. So there's lots of strategies we can take, especially now we get international partners. We're starting to see industry invest, and that's helpful. But the truth is, we know we're not going to get all the money at the moment that we need it. So that's okay, as long as we have a framework, a wireframe, if you will. We understand, we can wait for more fruitful times, we can be thoughtful about what order we're doing things, and we keep continuing to invest at the rate that we have. On the other hand, if you're not talking about that wireframe, if you're not talking about the architecture, if you're not talking about Mars, and if you're not talking about strategy, and that is what has happened for the last decade, that wireframe disappears. And what you got is a loose bucket of programs. There it is, it's a floating cloud. And people say, well, what are you doing? Why do you have to have that? How does it all fit? I don't understand. And I've been outside the agency for more than a decade, and I have heard all of those questions asked of me as a former NASA person. And this is a problem for us. We have to have that wireframe, we have to have the architecture, we have to have the strategy very clear in all of our heads so that we understand how all those bits and pieces fit together. So to do that, we need to start with an objective-based approach. What is our goal? We have to think strategically. We have to think with political resiliency, but also flexibility in mind. We're talking about a 2-decade-long strategy. There will be new capabilities. There will be new technologies. We really have to make sure that we understand what we're doing and that we account for all of that. And to achieve unity of purpose, we also have to answer some of the foundational questions. You've probably heard them all. Well, why don't we just go straight to Mars? Why are we going to the moon? Or, no, we need to just focus on science, and we're going to do that robotically, and we're going to send robots, and what's the value of humans to science? Well, you guys know better than that. We do science every day on the International Space Station that changes the world with our crews. But there are lots of people out there. You probably heard all those people talking about, well, your strategy should be this, or your goal should be that, and why aren't you doing this, and why aren't you doing that? So it took a little bit of time, but I took a step back and said, no, we've got to go to a bigger place than this. We've got to go to a place that encompasses all of those things that people want to do. Not just, you should be doing this one thing, or this is the purpose, or this is how you should be doing it. We need to be thinking bigger about what we're really doing. And I believe our goal, I believe what the American people want from us, is to create a blueprint for sustained human presence and exploration throughout the solar system. Every word in this goal has a meaning. What do I mean by blueprint? Well, we got to figure this out, right? We need to figure out how we're going to do this. And the moon is an excellent place for us to practice and to figure out this blueprint. And then we can go demonstrate it on Mars and other destinations over and over and over again. Each destination will have its unique challenges, but we have a lot of questions to answer about what order we should be doing things in, what our priorities should be, what our major challenges will be overall as we execute this mission of pushing humans out for sustained presence throughout the solar system. So why sustained? Why does that matter? I mean, really, if we're doing science and we're doing exploration, we're like, I don't know, Star Trek. We're on our 5-year mission, we're going to visit the planet, and then we'll be on our way. Well, they had a lot more infrastructure than we did, frankly. So I get it, though, and I've heard this. It's like, hey, we don't need to stay on the moon that long to figure this out, how to go to Mars, and I get that. Here's the challenge. One of the things we learned from the space shuttle is the tantalizing science that we got by flying 6 or 7 times a year for 2 weeks at a time. That was the whole motivation behind the International Space Station, so that we could maximize the science we're doing and do it 365 days a year. So it's a fairly good argument. Hey, for the moon, it's a 3 to 4 day trip. If you stay 30 days, come back 3 or 4 days, that's a pretty good return on science investment of the time you spend. Now, it may be okay for a test flight to Mars to spend 6 months on the way, 30 days on the surface, and then 6 months home. But I don't think that's going to satisfy us long term. So if we're really going to get the most science out of the exploration that we're going to do of the solar system, that's our job, is to stay at the cutting edge and find out and discover and explore. We're going to have to stay longer. And there's only one way to do that, and that's infrastructure. So we have got to at least practice and figure out how to put infrastructure on the surface of the moon. That has an added benefit as well, because in addition to supporting more science, it also fires on that other cylinder about national capabilities. Because what we know here on Earth is when you create infrastructure, commercial builds business models around it, and they will follow. And we're seeing them do it in low Earth orbit, and we believe that's going to happen if we can develop some foundational infrastructure on the moon. Now, it's not NASA's job to put a grid on the moon, but it is important to us to have power capability, and it's going to be important that we do that in a way that is scalable and extensible so that industry can follow us and others can follow who will create a sustained presence on the moon and in other places that we go. So just like we're seeing people following us to low Earth orbit, they are going to follow us for a variety of reasons out into the solar system. So this is the aspirational goal, is to create this blueprint. And now I'm going to turn it over to Spuds Vogel, our Director of Space Architectures, to talk about what we have been doing to implement this.
Thank you, Pam. Okay, well, good morning, everybody. I met a bunch of you when we came out here in the spring to talk about when we started down this path, so it's good to see you all again. Never been in this auditorium before. You guys, know how to put on a good show here, I'll tell you. So the Moon to Mars strategy is guided by a robust systems engineering process and 5 interrelated principles. The beginnings of that systems engineering process, Pam already showed. The foundation for it is that Y Venn diagram. That is what we build the systems engineering on. So now let's move into the what. The beginning of the what is that blueprint statement. But if we left it just at that, that statement by itself would then start to, it would get us into it's broad, okay, you can satisfy that in many ways. So before we just jump right into the how, there was a challenge put forth by Deputy Administrator Melroy and Associate Administrator Cabana to say to the Federated Board and the mission directors and their representatives on the Federated Board in concert with the Center SMEs to take a look at this goal and start moving left. The second principle, we lost the slides. The second principle, the first one is the objective-based approach, and that is kicked off by that blueprint statement. As we get into the next principle, which is to architect from the right, with that goal established, let's start moving to the left. Let's architect from that distant goal and move to the left. The first steps in architecting for the right, then, instead of just jumping right into the houses, let's flesh out that what a little bit more. Right? So to flesh that out, the challenge put forth by the leadership, you want me to hold off or I'll just keep going? All right. The challenge put forth by the leadership is let's establish those top level goals and objectives as we move left. Don't add a lot of metrics to it yet. That's getting into the how. We're not going to talk about specific technology solutions, but what are those top level goals, those timeless goals and objectives that 10 years from now we would look back and say this hasn't changed, they're the same goals we need. And so as that challenge was put forward, there were 4 buckets or tracks, we call them, that we put those objectives in. The first was science. Not only is it one of the why, foundational pillars of the why, but it's also part of the execution. It's that everything that goes into the objectives for science are answering questions about ourselves, about the universe, etc. The next bucket is infrastructure, the critical support things that we need, power, the things that are essential that are going to need for all time, power, propulsion, power, comm, nav, that kind of thing. There's other infrastructure activities that actually, in some cases, support science, that in some cases lay the foundation for follow-on activities from our industry and international partners. The next bucket down is transportation habitation. We have to get there, we have to get back, and we have to support the crew in transit as well as on the surface. And then the fourth bucket is operations. Operations is, compared to what we've been, and this is the crowd that knows this all too well. It's a different venue now. It's a different domain that we're talking about. We're going longer. We're going further away. We're staying for longer periods of time. So the operations is going to be a bit different. So there's a whole host of top-level objectives we need to look at there. So yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate it. So I know it's an eye chart there, but it's not meant for you to read per se. But that second guiding principle of architecting from the right is to now start from that goal and then start moving left. And this is the first flesh out, if you will. Back when we came back and talked to you initially when we started down this path in the spring, we had about 45 objectives. And I'm going to get into this in a moment, but that has grown since then. But once you've got those objectives established, as you continue to architect from the right, moving left, that establishes this previous piece, that is the what, with sufficient detail and with enough rigor that we say, okay, we know how to move, we know how to keep moving left. So then, led by ESDMD, the folks that own the architecture going forward, in concert with the other mission directors and the centers, start working left, start adding the qualifiers and the requirements all the way back to AOAs in the cases that we need them. And eventually you start to flesh out the how, all the way down to who's doing what. So that's architect from the right. The next principle is constancy of purpose. Once you've established that plan, as Pam had mentioned, when you try to insulate ourselves from those red blobs, part of that is sticking with the plan. Once we've got it, we need to communicate it. We need to make sure that even if only part of that's funded, that we understand and can communicate to everybody what the rest of the plan is. There's a constancy there that means not necessarily you never change it, because it's a long haul game we're doing here, which means as new technology insights come along and maybe we feel like there's some tweaks we need to make to the plan, that there's this, all we mean by consistency or constancy is that we use the same rigor in making changes and modifications to that plan as that went into creating it to begin with. There's unity of purpose. We've got to be unified. Everyone needs to understand, inside and outside the agency, everyone needs to understand the vision, the goals, the objectives, all the way down to, as the plan gets fully fleshed out, to the baselines, that everyone understands what that is and can communicate and articulate that. You'll see there's another bill that happened over there on the right-hand side, the recurring tenets. There are a number of things we recognized over the development of these objectives. There are common themes, values, influences that spread across multiple, if in some cases all of the objectives. We bend those into something called recurring tenets. And so that actually feeds into the unity of purpose as well, because a lot of those tenets which you'll see definitely apply to being unified and collaborative in this effort as we go forward. And then finally is enhanced communication and engagement. This is the principle that ties all the rest of them together. It's the lifeblood that guides all of this reinforcing cycle of all the other principles and the robust systems engineering process. It's what provides us information to our stakeholders to make sure they understand what we're trying to do. It's about, even internally, it's about engaging and collaborating inside the agency as well as with our international and industry and academia partners on the outside. It also provides us a way to get feedback, because we don't want to do this in isolation. This isn't just something that's coming down. The only thing that comes down from leadership is the what. After that, it's us. It's us and and our partners out there. So communication and collaboration are really at the center of all of this. This is what's going to make this work, or if we don't do it, it's where it will falter. So in the context of getting feedback, this is part of the process that a lot of you were involved with since we started down this path. We recognized we didn't want to do this in a vacuum, pun intended, and so we wanted to have feedback. So there was 4 different feedback campaigns that we started off on in the spring, early summer timeframe. One is not shown on here. It was a gap analysis led by the Federated Board, also in concert with Center and assisted by Senator Smees. Many of you participated in that, where we actually took a look at the objectives, the draft objectives from back in the spring, and looked at them through the lens of all the current efforts that were going on. And we did that based on the different mission directorates. We looked at it from the standpoint of not just having an early assessment of the architecture efforts, but also to be a wire brushing, if you will, of the objectives themselves. So that was one of the ways we got feedback on our objectives, as an internal look at it. But these other 3 campaigns was an outreach to 3 different stakeholder groups: the international partners, on the U.S. side, the industry partners, as well as academia, and then internal to the NASA workforce. 3 diverse stakeholder groups here, but we got a lot of inputs. In total, we got over 5,000 inputs from all of the stakeholder groups. And it was wide and varied, but it was also comprehensive and extremely useful to us. At the end of the day, the result was that we grew from the original 45 that the Federated Board had sort of reached consensus on, and then through that gap analysis we did, it grew to 50. And then in May is when we put out the video and the explanation of those draft objectives, the 50 objectives. Over the course of that scrubbing over the summer then with the input that you all provided, it grew from 50 to 63 objectives spread out over those 4 tracks, those 4 track areas, with 10 top-level goals assigned across those tracks. And as I mentioned, the recurring tenets. The recurring tenets, you can just kind of see the laundry list of them. Many of these were fundamental assumptions that we were making, but we didn't realize until we got the feedback from folks that were things that we needed to not just highlight, but in some cases amplify a little bit more than just assume that they're there. So they were always there, I think. The first 4 actually were expressed in the form of a glossary we had put out in the original release. But that's when we decided, okay, maybe we need to have this entire section called recurring tenets. So you can take a look at that. If you haven't had a chance already, that QR code at the bottom will take you to a link with a welcome letter and an explanation from Pam, from Colonel Melroy, as well as all the details of each one of those 63 objectives, the recurring tenets, and the glossary. So I encourage you to take a look at that, because really that last principle of communication is where it's at. You all can help us by communicating to the outside world, to the public, as you interact with each other and with your partners, as well as the people you're interacting with in your community. Understand this, because this is really the lifeblood of what keeps this all going. We talked about, so these objectives then combined with the blueprint statement, that combined makes a fully developed what in that systems engineering process. So now what we need to do is hand over to ESDMD and the leadership that they have on building this architecture, and that's the how, which eventually gets us to who's doing what in this process. So with that, I'll hand it over to Kathy Kerner.
So good morning. Jim Free sends his regrets that he wasn't able to be here today, but I'm very privileged to be able to talk with you a little bit about what we're doing in terms of Moon to Mars exploration here at the agency. Our agency conducts a broad spectrum of exploration activities, and specific to ESDMD, we focus on human exploration. We do all of that through the lens of science, and science not just for the sake of science itself, but also science as it enables exploration. For example, understanding the constituents in the lunar regolith will help us to understand what types of in situ resource utilization we can conduct both on the moon and eventually on Mars. So we can eventually become an Earth independent, or at least more Earth independent, as we move forth in our exploration strategy. We also are focused on conducting, after the initial human lunar return activities, setting up an annual cadence of exploration of the moon. Initially starting with 2 crew members for short durations on the surface, but eventually evolving to 4 crew members in longer duration. In order to do that, we have to establish more and more infrastructure on the surface, which is going to take our best efforts to create technologies that we don't have yet today and incorporate that into our exploration strategy. All of this is with an eye on Mars and eventual Mars exploration. We're going to use surface terrestrial analogs as well as low Earth orbit analogs. Initially, the International Space Station has been a great partner with us, but also eventually ComLeo, as Angela sets up that office and brings those partners on board. We'll be doing more and more analogs there that help us both with lunar exploration, but eventual Mars exploration as well. And then the ultimate test bed will be what we do on the lunar surface to help us towards Mars. And we don't ever do this alone. We do this with our partners. I don't have to tell the folks here at the Johnson Space Center the importance of international partnerships with the International Space Station activities, but also with Gateway and Orion. All of the exploration activities we do within ESDMD focus us towards, or give us this challenge of having to do the daunting task of setting up an exploration strategy that you heard Colonel Melroy talk about earlier. Our architecture has always been and will continue to be based on capabilities that we have currently, but that we can also bring on board. We tend to focus our efforts, traditionally have focused our efforts in 3 different areas. In transportation, we have the Space Launch System and the fantastic Orion spacecraft that is currently orbiting the moon. Gives me chills just thinking about it, Howard. But also, we're going to need transportation on the surface of both the moon and also on Mars. And Laura Kearney has been a fantastic partner with us in helping us get the pressurized rover, but also lunar terrain vehicles set up. We also have to develop technologies and habitation and life support, which I know a lot of you in the engineering directorate here are involved with, both for in space, but also, again, on the surface. And then infrastructure. Pam mentioned it, and I've mentioned it, and Spuds has mentioned it. It's very important for us to develop capabilities that then our partners can come along with us and participate with and utilize and expand on after we have established that initial capability. And not just our international partners, but also our industry partners and our partners in other government agencies. So with this daunting task of having to create an architecture and looking at it through the lens of the objectives and trying to focus our efforts, we said, what are we doing currently in our lunar architecture arena, and how does that map to what we eventually want to do on Mars? And we're really looking for the parallels in a number of different disciplines and trying to focus our energies and our resources on those so that as we are expanding and learning how to live and operate in the cislunar environment, we have parallels to what we're going to do on Mars, and we're making those technology leaps and those partnerships leaps and the development of our operations such that we can move closer and closer to eventual human exploration of Mars and other terrestrial bodies. So to do this, we've taken what we've done previously with architectures and again looked at it through the lens of the objectives and this effort that Pam and Bob have challenged us to do. And we have set up what we're calling an architecture concept review cycle. What we're doing is we're establishing an architecture that has various phases that include human lunar return, excursions and exploration of various sites in the South Polar region, eventual establishment of a base camp, all while doing those parallels to the Mars activities so that we can also be developing capabilities that will take us to Mars. And we're going to conduct our very first architecture concept review in January of this year. We've recently put out a CR that has an architecture definition document which talks to a lot of what we have mentioned here and what our plans are going forward, but it's just the first step. It is just talking about some of the initial excursions and activities that we're going to be doing with our architecture. And in subsequent architecture concept reviews, we'll have more definition for the more strategic aspects of our architecture. This first cut at it and this first cycle we're doing in January, but ultimately what we're trying to do is get to an annual cadence where we can review this and incorporate it into our budget cycle so that as an agency, not just as an exploration systems development mission directorate, but as an agency, the SMD, STMD, all of our mission directorates that do human exploration can all be focused on the same things and have the same plan and the same vision for human exploration going forward. That'll help us with our stakeholders. It'll help us internally as we're trying to make really challenging budget decisions. But it also helps us have consistency both internally but also externally with our partners and as they're trying to develop their budgetary process. We're going to shift to the November cycle. So the first one will be in January, and then the second one and subsequents will be in November. And you, as a community, will have an opportunity to weigh in on what the agency is doing going forward, how we're executing our architecture, and how we are incorporating new technologies and what we are learning on previous missions. Our intent here is not to say we're going to go to one destination or have a single architecture, but that we have an evolutionary process that takes into account the learning that we're doing, both, again, from a technology perspective, but also as new partners come on board. We've seen new commercial partners, we've seen new international partners with the Artemis Accords come on board, and that's really exciting for us because what that means is we really are setting up a blueprint, not just for NASA, but for global exploration, for humanity to move out beyond the cislunar environment and explore the universe. So what does that mean here to the Johnson Space Center? Well, I've already mentioned a number of the programs and the projects that you have going on here that are already contributing mightily to what we're doing in human exploration. And we anticipate that to continue. This is the home of human spaceflight. This is where we do operations, and we expect that to continue. How we do it and what that looks like might be a little bit different going forward. In fact, you'll hear a little bit more about that if you're in the session this afternoon, where you're going to hear about the evolution of our not only leadership, but also our acquisition strategies as we bring these new commercial partners in particular on board. But this center is going to be key to us moving forward in operating human spaceflight. And I'm really excited about the future that it holds for the agency and for the Johnson Space Center, and I hope you are too. Now it is my privilege to hand over to someone who doesn't really need much of an introduction, Bob Cabana.
Thanks, Kathy. It's great to come home. I want to echo what Pam said. I spent 21 years of my NASA career here at the Johnson Space Center, and I was talking to the senior staff this morning. When I come back, I feel like I can drive across the street to Nassau Bay and go home and have dinner with my family and stuff. Unfortunately, they're all grown up and on their own now, but it is a great place, and I truly enjoyed my time here. So it's always nice to come home. That rocket launch, I just got to echo what Pam said. Pam and the administrator and I, when we came out of the T-minus 10-minute hold, went up on the roof of the Launch Control Center. And I have seen a lot of rocket launches, but that SLS was absolutely amazing. It was just phenomenal. I was on such a high afterwards. I had a real spring in my step. And we have seen that in the centers that we've been to, at Marshall, at KSC, here at JSC. You can just feel the excitement, the positive vibes that have come out as a result of that launch and successful flight thus far. But have you ever noticed that when KSC launches a rocket, it's always on a Thursday or a Friday before a long weekend or a holiday? You know, I mean, when I was here working in mission control as a Capcom and stuff, you always knew it was a holiday because we were working and there was a shuttle in space. And so you guys had to work through Thanksgiving. But I think it was worth it, don't you? I mean, it's... just absolutely amazing. And thank you to the JSC team that delivered that awesome Orion spacecraft. I cannot wait to see it flying again. So that's our next challenge. Let's get this thing going again. Let's get Artemis 1 home. Get those avionics boxes that we need so we can get Artemis 2 built and tested and on our way with a crew to the moon this time. And that's going to be absolutely fantastic. You guys are going to make that happen. All right. Why are we doing all of this? All right, first off, I have to give kudos to our Deputy Administrator, Pam. She has been the driving force behind this objective-based, requirements-based architecture that we're pulling together, that the Federated Board, that Spuds has been leading the effort on. It is crucial that we have a sustainable plan as we go forward. We do not want this to be a one and done. This is not Apollo. People ask, well, how is this different from Apollo? It is so different from Apollo, and we can go into that. I'm not going to talk about it now. Ask a question. We'll talk more why it's different from Apollo. We are establishing a sustainable architecture that doesn't just take us to the moon, that doesn't just take us to Mars. It establishes a presence in our solar system beyond our home planet. This is evolvable, sustainable, and it's objectives and requirements based, as Spud said. And everybody has participated in that. So looking ahead, what's next? This is an ongoing process. Kathy mentioned it. We are going to do continual reviews each year to make sure that we got it right. We have to continue to evolve this and make sure that the objectives and the requirements that we have in place are the right ones. As technology changes, as we move forward, there's going to be iterations to this. Continual documentation is going to be crucial. Every time we fly, we're going to learn a lot. We've already learned a lot from Artemis 1. We are learning how to operate this Orion spacecraft in space. We've had a few hiccups. We're learning about the star trackers, right? We learned about the rocket on Ascent. We learned about the ground systems, okay? Modifications are going to get made before we do Artemis 2, and so on. As we get to the lunar surface, there will be changes as we learn and continue to grow. And part of that is good communication and documentation. And communication is so important. Communication and engagement. You know, that's the other thing about this. As Spud said, we're not doing it in a vacuum, right? All the work that was done, meeting with our international partners, getting their input on it, meeting with industry, getting their input, internally getting the input. And what we want to do now, and Pam said, this is the time to do it. Let's get out now after the launch and share why we're doing what we're doing and how we're doing it, and that those three pillars. All of us need to be absolutely bought into this and engaged with it. We have to be able to communicate it to our stakeholders, to our community, why we are doing what we're doing, the importance of it, and how we're going to do it. You guys need to own this architecture, or it's not going to be successful. And the real key here is, and the whole reason that we're doing this is so that it's sustainable between administrations as we go forward. And I really think that we're on an excellent path, and my kudos to Pam for helping us do this. The architectural concept review. As I mentioned, you know, these top-level objectives, we're going to have to continue to define them. ESD is going to be working this. January, we'll have the first one, as we've been working on this for the last year or so. Getting that input, continuing to make sure that we're on the right path, and then getting to that annual cadence to make sure that we continue forward. I think we're going to have white papers, all right? We're going to have to document our decisions. So many times in the past, decisions have been made, and we have to, well, why did they do what they did? If we were going to make this sustainable, we have to document why we made the decisions that we've made so that it's understandable as we go forward, so that when we make further decisions, they have the basis for how those decisions were made. So we want to be really transparent about the choices that we make in this architecture as we move forward, and part of that is documenting it thoroughly so that we can continue on. And, you know, finally, the Federated Board doing the targeted reviews. I think it's really important. The Federated Board, as Spuds mentioned, we've got the mission directors, we've got center directors that come in on it. It's really important that we do gap analysis as we go on and see what are we missing, what did we miss as we go forward, as we continue to learn in how we develop and fill that. I think this is absolutely a truly exciting time for our nation's space program. We have a path forward, all right? We are establishing a presence in our solar system that is sustainable. we are going back to the moon, but we're doing it differently than we did from Apollo. We're doing it in a sustainable way, not for a 2 or 3 day camping trip, but with a sustained presence to learn to develop what we need to operate away from our home planet for extended periods of time, in situ resource utilization, the correct architecture in preparation for going on to Mars and beyond. And that's not going to happen without the outstanding work of the folks here at the Johnson Space Center. Your operations, human spaceflight expertise is absolutely critical to us being successful as we move forward. And I got to tell you, it was not my plan to end up where I am, but I could not be more happy or proud to be part of the leadership team that we have at NASA headquarters that's helping make all of this happen and continuing to remain a part of this amazing team here at the Johnson Space Center. So thank you so much for all that you do, and we look forward to taking questions, not on just this, but on anything and everything that you have. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Vanessa.
Awesome. Thank you, Bob, and for all the panelists. So you guys have been seeing on the screen, there's like a QR code. You can point to that, and it'll take you to the I.O. link. We also receive questions from you through the Ask the Director. So we're going to start with some of those questions. We also have a mic down here. I can tell you we already have a load of questions, great questions from you. So Jasmine Nahili is going to facilitate the questions. So Jasmine, sending it over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Vanessa. So for our first question, how successful do you see the agency's approach to remote and telework? Any changes expected?
I do have a mic. So changes to remote and telework. Obviously, we went through a tremendous transition from where we were pre-COVID, through COVID, to where we are now. And we were able to accomplish all the amazing things that we did during COVID because of who we are, because of the relationships that we had with one another going into it, because we're NASA, because of our culture. And we brought on a lot of new folks during COVID. Some folks have left, and we've been going through this, okay, what does work look like in the future as we come back together? And Melanie Saunders and the team have been looking at the future of work. They've laid out some guidelines, but the future of work is going to be what is required for each center and the jobs that are being done, the work that is being done. The work determines who comes to work and how it gets done, whether it is in person or done remotely. And different jobs require a different effort. I think we're still learning, but it's going to be up to the centers and the center director and the programs at the centers to decide how they want to operate. While we were at KSC, they're looking at, they call it purposeful presence. Yeah, I think it should have been presence with purpose, which is a lot easier to say than purposeful presence. But they've chosen purposeful presence. And what it means is that when you are together on site, in person, that you're doing it in a meaningful way. And, you know, the one thing we don't want is people to come on site and sit in a cubicle doing Teams. You know, that's not efficient. That's not the right thing to do. When we come together in person, we want to be doing meaningful work together. And there are going to be times when we need to do that. I don't want us to lose our culture. NASA's a special place. The Johnson Space Center is a special place. And we have a very rich history and culture. And that wasn't developed, you know, with everybody sitting at home working on a computer. That's not to say that that's wrong or you can't do that, but there has to be the opportunity to get together in person to execute the mission that we have to build that culture. And I think it will evolve. Pam's working on something. I'm going to let Pam talk to this too, and Casey Swales, but it's through our plan for the future with our facilities. And we want to make sure that our facilities What are the requirements for our facilities to do what NASA needs to get done? And that's going to help determine who comes to work also. And I think, we have some work to do in making sure that the facilities that we have fully support the new environment that we're going to be in, where they're this hybrid. Anything you want to add to that, Pam?
Yeah, I just want to amplify that, yes, we have work to do. I think wow, I sound really loud. I think we have more work to do. We know that it's going to take us time to figure out what jobs, or even more importantly, what tasks in our jobs we need to be doing together and face-to-face, and which ones are fine to do remote and telework. And that's going to differ by center. It's going to differ by roles and responsibilities. But for me, I look at it as a tremendous opportunity. So Casey has been working with the Mission Support Directorate on an agency master plan for our facilities. But here's what's exciting. We've kind of continued to build buildings and have buildings that really reflected the way that we used to interact and work decades ago. So we have the opportunity to actually use the opportunity to reshape the spaces. And so part of that is going to be an analysis of how much of your time do you spend doing what kind of task, and what's the best place for you to do it. So to the point of, you don't want to come in and sit in a cubicle and be on a Teams meeting all day. That doesn't make any sense at all. So the amount of your time that you spend in that kind of activity needs to have the capabilities to support that. But we're seeing a lot more interest in collaborative work. And so I think I'm excited about the opportunity to have facilities that, in the words of the administrator, don't look like a 60s Soviet era cell block, right? So let's get some, as he says to us, let's get some facilities that look like NASA. So for me, I think this analyzing very intentionally what we are doing, what is the best way to break down your job into the tasks that you do and how you do that, and then actually design our facilities to optimize around the different ways that are ideal for doing those particular tasks. Not just ideal for you, actually ideal for the organization. So don't forget, you may feel very happy doing a task alone, but in fact, that may not be the right thing for the organization. We are a team of teams at NASA. That is our rocket fuel, is our people and our teamwork. And so some things are actually done better in collaboration with others, and we just need to think about what is the best way to do all of those things for the mission, for the organization and for the mission.
Yeah, and I would also like to add to that, I really appreciate the fact that, our leadership does understand that we have unique cultures, that we need to be able to preserve that. I'll take a phrase actually from Langley, where they're talking about what does it mean to be a citizen of NASA, right? So it's not just about, like Pam says, sometimes your own individual job, but it's your contribution to the overall mission. It's a part of being a citizen of NASA. So I do want to, thank you guys for giving us the flexibility to work as a leadership team on exactly what does that look like. Because here at the Johnson Space Center, not every directorate or program is the same. So giving them flexibility to figure out what's the right way to do it. So thank you for that. Thanks for the question.
Thank you. Next, when will the agency announce the organizational structure for the new Moon to Mars program office?
As soon as we get it totally approved.
Yeah, we still have to go through the process of approval for that, and working closely with Jim and Kathy on some of the details of where the boxes are.
And not just working closely with Jim and Kathy, but with the center directors, Siemens Spaceflight Center directors also. This has been a joint effort as we come forward, and as soon as we get it fully approved by OMB and the Hill, then we'll be able to share it in detail with everyone.
Okay. What do you see as the top 2 challenges to accomplishing the agency's Moon to Mars objectives?
Top 2 challenges. So I think obviously one of the huge challenges is getting the budget to do what we actually need to do. And I have to tell you, we are blessed to have Senator Nelson as our administrator. How he operates, I have learned so much watching him work with OMB and the Hill to accomplish what NASA needs and to get us the large increase that we got last year, and going forward to hopefully, get what we need to be successful. And you have to realize we're in very fiscally constrained times. There is not that much discretionary spending in our budget, and for NASA to get what it gets, it's a huge statement by the administration that this is important to our future, space exploration. And I think it's incumbent upon us to deliver on what we say we are going to do. When we have delays and cost overruns or something doesn't go right, we lose that credibility with our stakeholders, and we lose their trust. If we can deliver on what we say we're going to do, we gain trust and we gain more support and the ability to do more. So I think the first challenge is going to be getting the funding to do what we need to do. But that second challenge to me is actually delivering on what we say we're going to do.
I'd actually also throw in there that if you look at it from the standpoint of, from the context of those 5 principles, if you look at the last 2, the being unified and communicating, I think that the biggest risk, from my point of view, is that if things don't go smoothly at first, this is a process we're going through, and people get spooked at the individual organizational level, and then they drift back into the red blobs, the red blob chart. It's that keep that in mind. Be patient and be resilient, because the resilience that we're looking for outside, technically, fiscally, and politically, is going to start by us being resilient internal and being unified in it. As soon as we start to get, if there's any kind of concern, I'm not getting something funded fully or whatnot, and then drifting back into that old way, that would be a big risk in my mind.
I absolutely want to reinforce that. We have to speak with one voice to our stakeholders. As soon as there's division or somebody else is saying, I don't necessarily agree, or, I've got another way of looking at something, it eats away at our ability to accomplish the task that we have at hand. That's why all of you really have to understand what it is what we're doing. That's why this briefing today is so important, that all of us own this, that we have a path forward, that we all own it, that we believe in it, and that we can communicate it with one voice. And that goes along with our reorganizations as we get them in place, that everybody's had a chance to input, that we make a decision, we move forward, and we speak with one voice.
And I'll just add, when I was here at JSC, I didn't really know how things worked, like why did these changes happen across administrations. So I'll just tell you, it's as simple as a new administration comes in, they pick somebody who knows something about NASA to be the head of a transition team, who then builds a team, and the first thing that team does is they go out and ask all the external stakeholders. They talk to people inside NASA, but mostly it's industry, it's the Hill, it may be somebody that you trust who's left NASA, and say, what needs to be fixed? What do we need to be doing here? So it's not just us having unity, but our industry partners, it's critical. That was why it was so important that we consulted with them. They're getting excited because they see a pipeline of opportunities to participate in. And so we need to help them get on board as well, because that's where we're going to have that resiliency across administrations. If we have a plan, all of our stakeholders get it and they agree with it, they see their face in the picture, and we do a good job of executing, plus you got flight hardware flying, we got a chance. We got a chance, folks.
And that's another reason why it's important to lay out this architecture the way Pam showed it in our charts and SPUDs. When a contractor doesn't win a key human spaceflight program that they think they're going to get a key piece of hardware to build, instead of them fighting us, they can see, hey, I also can compete for this piece down the road. And if we have a plan that everybody buys into, it's going to help us more with the industry also. And well, since Pam kind of brought it up, I want to give Pam huge kudos. Pam was on the transition team and was a key factor in helping us stay the course on the path that we were on as we returned to the moon. And now it's getting into an even better position by documenting why.
Thank you. As ESDMD and SOMD evolve, is there any intent to merge or more fully align the CESD and ACD organizations?
Yes. So really, all of that is, excuse me, is tied up in the Moon to Mars program that we were directed to do via authorization. And so, you know, as soon as that gets approved, we can share that and we can talk about that more openly. Unfortunately, it's not yet through the approval cycle.
Okay. This is addressed to Pam and Bob. Since both of you have flown on a shuttle flight, how did the launch of Artemis 1 feel to you, both in person and your thoughts on it?
You're gonna make me cry. Don't make me cry. You go first.
So I was on such an emotional high. I've seen a lot of shuttle launches. You know, the hardest job I had as an astronaut was being a family escort. Standing on the roof of the Launch Control Center holding a 2-year-old with 5 to 7 of your best friends on this ball of flame going off into space, it's really an emotional event. But I felt many of those same emotions watching Artemis 1 launch. That it was absolutely, hey, we're back. This is an awesome, this rocket is so different in its design from what, some of the commercial companies are doing. SpaceX has a unique approach to things, and I love the way they do it. They build a lot of hardware, they test it, they fail multiple times, they make modifications, and they go do it again, right? One of the reasons it took us the time that it did to fly this rocket is we engineered it perfect from the start. You know, it was absolutely, it deviated like 0.03% from its design flight path. It performed flawlessly because of the effort that we put into it. Orion is performing so well because of the effort that we put into it. And I think what gave me the most pride watching it was knowing all the work that this team put into it. And seeing it be successful and going up, it was just, my heart was filled with joy.
Yeah, it just was so powerful too. I mean, it really lit up, and I think being there on the roof with you and Bill, but also with like Norm and Reed and some of the previous launch directors like Bob Seek and Mike Leinbach and others, all being together on the roof. It was a small group, but believe me, there was a lot of hand-holding. And then there was cheers that erupted. But one of the things that was super cool to me was that the constellation Orion was right at the zenith. So I felt like it was pointed right at it. And then it made this turn right towards the moon. And I'm like, is that on purpose? I think that's on purpose. I think it doesn't just look that way. I think it's actually really doing that. And that was just, it looked so different from a shuttle launch, which is just less bright, but also goes over the horizon, right? Especially going to the space station towards the end, going up the coast, and we just could see it forever, and it was just a glorious moment. It really was.
So one more quick story. So I try not to take pictures of rocket launches, because the first picture of a rocket launch that I took was Apollo 13 when I was a midshipman, and all I saw was this tiny little Saturn V going up in my viewfinder instead of experiencing this awesome launch. And not only that, the film never even caught, so I don't even have the pictures. But after it was fairly high up, and it's still like daylight outside, not quite, more like dusk, it's not quite as bright, I kind of stepped back, and I was just standing behind everybody looking at them looking up, and I took a picture of Pam and the administrator from behind, with the both of them just looking up at this rocket with the rocket in between, and it's absolutely one of my favorite pictures. It absolutely captured the emotion, and it was total silence up on the roof. Nobody was saying anything, and it's pretty high up now and gone. And I'm standing behind everybody, and I just said, I'm behind Reed. And I said, I'd ride that rocket. And Reed just broke out laughing. But I'd ride that rocket, Pam.
I'd ride that rocket too, and I'd ride it with you. Okay, next question.
Alrighty. NASA is no longer the only place where people can work in human spaceflight. What is being done to help ensure NASA and its contractors are competitive in employee salaries to maintain core capabilities? Employee retention is an issue, especially for our contractors.
So, you know, that's one of the problems that we have as a federal organization, right? As a government, you know, we can't pay what our contractors get paid. So we have to look for other ways to be able to capture the quality of people that we need. And I think one way we do that is by the culture, by who we are. You know, we've been #1 on the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey 10 years in a row. We have our NASA family, our culture where we take care of one another. We are able to do things for our employees that contractors can't do. And I think there's still that draw of being part of NASA, of being able to do the things that we do here that's really important. I think that's why this new environment that we're going into, this hybrid work environment, it's going to be critical that we do it right so that we can continue to capture the people that we need to be able to do our job. You know, hopefully I think there's going to be a pay raise for, I'm hearing, you know, maybe around 4% as we go forward for federal employees so that we can recognize the folks that we have and help keep them here. I think the stability that we have in our organization is good also, but I don't know, anything you want to add to that, Pam? It's hard to compete with industry, and I think we do a really good job at it. We are losing some folks to industry. I actually feel good about our folks going off to industry because they take our culture with them when they go and how we do things. And we've had folks come back too later on. There's a lot of folks that went off to work at SpaceX, and after, you know, 5 or 6 years of that, they decided they wanted a little more, you know, stability in their lives. They wanted to bring that experience back to NASA. So I'm happy with us moving back and forth.
I agree. I think going to industry for me was a tremendously powerful experience, and really from a program manager standpoint, really understanding program management from both sides of the fence is actually a very powerful experience. But I am back at NASA, and I go back to the whys. So you probably heard some of this stuff about billionaires and blah, blah, and you know, all the chatter out there about that stuff. And what really differentiates us from industry is that we are the federal government, we are in charge of strategy, and I go back to the why chart. We make our decisions based on benefits to the American people and, in fact, to all of humanity. Now, when you're in industry, you make choices for different reasons. And some of our billionaire friends, when their choices and their reasons align with ours, that's great. They make great partners as long as we both have the same goals that we're trying to achieve. But you can't forget, they have no obligation or responsibility to think about the strategy for our country or for our industry or the benefit to people. They may pick a pillar and like that one and focus on it. Sometimes they have other reasons that they're thinking about as well. But that's the unique and special thing about being in the federal government, is we're in the driver's seat on strategy, and the entire American people is counting on us. And there's something about that that's really special.
Absolutely. When people ask me, well, what's NASA's role in all of this? NASA sets the course. NASA defines the path forward. NASA builds the coalitions between our international partners, our commercial partners, industry, and able to move forward and execute the plan. And I think that's a huge, huge responsibility and a great role to be part of.
Okay. What is being done to help improve budget prospects for institutional upkeep? Seems like our budget continues to reduce to maintain core infrastructure, employee training, and health and wellness options at JSC. Is this an issue at other centers as well?
I'm going to let Pam answer that.
Oh, yes, it is. This is one of those things that is super frustrating. We have had a problem for well more than a decade. We cannot seem, well, let's put it this way. We can sell rockets to the moon, and we can sell science, climate science, James Webb. We can show how X-planes impact the national leadership in aeronautics. But what was very hard to explain is that each one of those things comes with overhead, right? We have to support facilities, but also we have to support our people, the training. We have to have the HR and the contracting officers and the legal support and the financial support, the health and wellness. All of those things are foundational to that. And for some reason, we have not been able to communicate that. And in fact, we continue to get squeezed from that standpoint from both OMB and the Hill. So we have some work to do. I think there's a lot of thinking going on right now. Bob's deputy Casey is leading a lot of discussion in this area. We have to get our arms better around what we're actually spending, because it turns out that every center does spend its money a little bit differently. But I can tell you that absolutely every center has a major issue around this. And that's why if you read the administrator's intent, workforce is one of our priorities. I wish I could tell you we have a clear strategy like we were able to lay out for you for Moon to Mars. We are still working on that, but we have got to solve that problem because we need the workforce to support all this amazing work that we're doing. And so we've got to get a better job of selling it and getting more budget for it.
And I will say, Donna Schaefer's not here with us today, but the associate directors have been also supporting efforts with Casey on trying to get the arms around understanding the issue so that we can come up with solutions. So there is a lot of effort going into this.
And for those who don't know who Casey is, that's Casey Swales that used to work here at the Johnson Space Center, who's the Associate Administrator for Business Systems, and she oversees the Mission Support Council and all that's going on within mission support. And she's working really hard to, make sure that we're doing it in the most cost-effective and efficient way.
Thank you. How do you plan to encourage better collaboration and unity within NASA so we can achieve our vision on the limited budgets without a lot of duplicative and repetitive efforts?
Say
Can you
it
say it
again.
one more time? Yeah.
Absolutely. How do you plan to encourage better collaboration and unity within NASA so we can achieve our vision on the limited budgets without a lot of duplicative and repetitive efforts?
So I think the centers are working together better than they ever have at NASA. And collaboration is going to be key to our success. We had this discussion this morning with senior staff. Obviously, there are skills at each center that are going to remain unique to that center, but we still have to be able to learn to work together. Collaboration, I think how we are, that was the whole purpose of, having enterprise solutions to the various, the CFO, CIO, infrastructure, procurement, was to be able to share and have best practices across to be more efficient. And we got some work to do. There's still always room for improvement, but that's the goal, is to have that collaboration between all the centers, bring it together so that we have the best in each area. From an operational point of view, you want to have an example of collaboration. I always use the commercial crew program as an example of great collaboration. We've got the KSC, JSC, and Marshall with individuals at each center, where you can have a supervisor at one center supervising people at another center. The work that team does as one is really important, but there are unique skills at each center that it couldn't all be at one center. You have to have that cross mix of people as you execute. So collaboration is going to be important as we move forward. No, we don't want to duplicate things. So we worked very hard years ago to ensure that we've defined center roles, that we have the expertise that we need at each center, so that we can work together to achieve a common goal.
I'd just like to comment, I see this kind of in two streams, if you will. And things like Moon to Mars strategy are very helpful in the objectives so that people all understand what we're working towards. But I look to the mission directorates. The workforce is a demand-driven model. The mission directorates have the programs and the projects. And so they need to really understand the individual strengths of every center and put together projects and programs that optimize around that. And I think that's very, very important. And I think all of our mission directorates really do understand that and work closely with the center directors on the projections going out to the future. But there's a special piece to this. And some of you may be familiar with the idea that we had for the budget cycle this year for Center Big Ideas, right? Because there are things that go outside of what the mission directorate is planning. It's really about the future of the center. It's got to be more strategic. So in addition to pushing for more IRAD, in addition to a Center Innovation Fund, we also asked for a Center Big Idea. It's just kind of especially something that cut across all the mission directorates. Because I don't know if you've ever tried to get something funded that everyone wants, because everyone keeps hoping somebody else will pay for it, and it's almost impossible to get funded. So the idea was to pick something that would actually benefit everyone at a center. And we selected the JSC Center Big Idea to be funded this year.
And it's actually a collaboration between our CIO, engineering, and the programs on how can we have a collaborative environment. And so we're working with other centers, with all the mission directorates, because as it turned out, S&D wanted to be able to get their data out. So they were like, yeah, that's a great idea. Same thing with, ESDMD, SOMD, and then, we have the pull from, those that need to get their data protected, like human health and performance. And so therefore it's great. We can span, as you said, we can span across all of those with this one effort. And we're working with industry and academia.
So we want the rigor of, hey, we need a workforce that supports our mission, right? That's what we're asking for. And so we need to be focused on that. But we have to keep that future piece in mind and let things bubble up.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. What is NASA doing to improve diversity, especially in leadership roles?
I'd like to answer that question. That is something that consumes a lot of my thought, particularly around strategy. I'm going to make an overarching comment, which is kind of the same complaint I've had about STEM for years, which is we got 1,000 flowers blooming in this country, right? There are more STEM programs than you can shake a stick at. And have we turned the needle? No, we have not. So maybe it's my military background, but I think you need to have a concentration of forces, and I think it needs to be orchestrated. One of the big challenges for us is across, and it's not just NASA, it's not just across our industry, diversity and equal opportunity offices have been about helping keep things, solve problems, solve individual problems for individuals or groups where there is a situation that is stressful, unfair, or needs to be addressed. And so that ability to sit down and negotiate solutions and figure out how to solve these individual problems or group problems on a specific subject is really what the expertise in that entire professional discipline is all about. Well, now, what I'm asking our Diversity and Equal Opportunity Office, Steve Shee, charged with this, is to change that and to say we have got to tackle institutional issues. We've got to look in a much more holistic way about things like the way we fund research, which creates a pipeline for STEM, but there's also hiring. I'll give you a great example. University Leadership Initiative, something that aeronautics is doing, heavily focused on universities that we don't usually work with. You know, not the usual suspects, not the Purdues and the MITs, but other universities with a strong focus on minority-serving institutions. So were we recruiting for interns if we're paying professors and students to do research for us? Did they know that they could also then come be an intern, or potentially we could hire those people? We weren't really looking at it from a holistic standpoint. So I think we have a lot more work to do. Our strategic plan, I think, is a good plan. We have to be able to measure our success, so the data is critical, and that was one of those foundational pieces that we're missing, is actually looking at ourselves and saying who we are. Turns out there's a bunch of barriers to asking simple questions like, you know, what's your gender identity? Turns out it's not legal for us to ask that. It isn't legal. And in some cases, we can't even ask you to say it voluntarily. So we got some real barriers that we have to work through. But we're working now on the implementation plan, that where the rubber really meets the road. But we're looking to the centers, because I do think that each of the centers faces different challenges. So that is the next step, that is what we are working on. But overall, I just want to share with you my strategy in this area is that we take a much more holistic approach. We're looking at institutional barriers. We're looking at a full set of problems, not just one-off problems that we're trying to solve. It needs to be across the board. So if we can measure it, hopefully we'll see some improvement. But thanks for whoever asked that. It is obviously something I care a lot about.
So, so the agency has a strategic plan, and each of the centers have requirement to provide our implementation plans, and our plan is actually due next week. We're having an I&I council to go over that plan to get that provided up to the agency. So we're on track.
Thank you.
So with that being the last question, I want to thank our panelists, and thank you so very much for coming. And I want to make a big announcement. If you have not yet, because I see someone with his Santa hat on, if you have not purchased your ticket yet for Jingle Mingle with a Splash. So this is going to be a family-oriented event. It's going to be at the Gilruth on December 15th, 4:30 to 7-ish. And so we want you to come out. We're going to be celebrating Jingle and Mingling, but we're also celebrating the splashdown of Orion. So please remember to support that. And I believe we're also planning, Arturo, a watch party. We're going to have a watch party here on December 11th. So that's the actual entry and splashdown. Around 11 a.m. is the target. So please plan to come out and celebrate. We have a lot to celebrate. Thank you. Arturo, the party. We're going to have a watch party here. I don't know what that other sound was.